It's a very interesting subject in which we're going into now, because it started, if I take you back to the year 2000 in Denmark, I did a program over television in Denmark known as the Hauntings, where I taught the Danish people about hauntings in Denmark. And there was about 16 programs of these hauntings. But what was really interesting was that after the first two sort of weeks that we had these hauntings, I realized something that was very interesting, and that was, before the program started in Denmark, it was also filmed for Sweden and Norway, so they also had them, plus Iceland and Greenland. They all saw my program in all those countries, in the Nordic countries, not just in the Scandinavian countries. But what I realized and this is quite fascinating, the day before that my program came out, there was hardly ever spoken about any kind of hauntings in Scandinavia. It was not something that was ever written about. It wasn't something that was talked about. But as soon as my program came into view and they started to see what this was all about, within those 2 weeks, I think something like 80% of all homes in Scandinavia was suddenly haunted. And I was in deep shock, because I just sat with my hands in the air. They must have known for all those years that they had a hauntings, or they had something within the homes. But it was only after the television program it came up that suddenly the whole of the Nordic countries was haunted. So I started to think to myself, this is absolutely ridiculous. And equally, as I was doing the television programs, I suddenly also found out within a month, we must have had hundreds of mediums who suddenly proclaimed themselves to be exorcists or house cleaners and everything else, with a huge big tag of money behind it. And I was just really in horror to see what was happening. I saw this door being open, and I just couldn't understand it. So I, as a medium myself, I thought, well, I have to try to find out what this is all about, and why suddenly all these houses was haunted, and flats or whatever it was haunted. So I wanted to do a research, because yes, I wanted to see if we take it back a couple of 100 years or whatever, was there hauntings in those days too? Was there anybody who could explain? Did they have mediums then? What did they use in the Nordic countries as a tool for mediumship? And it actually got me on a very, very interesting journey for those many years to find out what kind of instruments was used, what kind of mediums maybe were used. I just wanted to know what this was all about. So I started to travel, but I traveled to places where I wanted to find out the old people. I want to have a talk to the old people, people who could go back in time, had spoken to their grandparents, great-grandparents, and so forth, to find out, what do you know about hauntings? What did you do in those times about hauntings, and so forth and so forth. So it got me into a journey trying to understand if there was something else that you can use. I know that in America, the Red Indian would have used their sage or whatever it is they were using. I know that they used it in all other countries. But I was more interested to finding out, if we didn't actually understand mediumship, what did they actually use? What is it? What have we got in common in all the European countries about this? So my journey really started to go into both Sweden, up to North Norway, into the Sami people, to Greenland. I started to work with the Greenlandic people, and then with the Vikings in Denmark, also to find out what they would have used back in the Viking times. So the journey was absolutely extraordinary, and the stories in which followed was even more bizarre, I would say, but it was absolutely fantastic just to listen to them. There was one thing I found in common, a thread with all of them, and that was that they didn't really use mediums going back 200 to 300 years. So I wonder, what did they use? And there was this thread I looked at, and it was absolutely extraordinary. They all used either copper or iron. That was things that they would have used, copper or iron. I thought it was absolutely incredible to actually find that. And then after that one, I thought, what else would they have used but copper and iron? Then I found out they will have used herbs also. They will have had bundles of herbs. They will have got into nature. They will have had things happen in nature. They will have all sorts of things. It was absolutely extraordinary, I have to say. So my journey really started, and my first step was into Sweden. But could I put up a screenshot so you can have a look and see what the iron looks like, and also the copper I use, and also the horseshoe. There's two copper, we call it rods, that lies there, and also a proper iron nail. Can you see that? And also, of course, a horseshoe. What I did find out about the copper, it has to be proper copper, and it also has to be the hardest things to get hold of today is obviously is iron, is literally iron. Because today we have got other stuff for iron, because as you can see, the horseshoe is all rusty, if you can see it, because that iron really rust very much indeed. So I had to go for look to get all this material in, and I found them all over the place. So it also made me smile, because, you know, the horseshoe wasn't just for good luck. It was actually used for something else that you will hear in a moment. So I'm going to go back to non-sharing, back again there, yeah?
Yep.
There we are. I sorted that one out.
You did well. That was your first time, and you did really well.
Yeah. So it was just interesting to see those, you know, those copper things, and finding it, and it took me a while, believe me, to find it. Anyhow, I ended up in Sweden, which I was showing the door in Sweden. I went up to, it's in the middle of Sweden. I was doing a lecture in what we know as a manor house in Sweden. And the manor house was that of a guy called Oyvind. And Oyvind is a professor at the university. And he had his manor house in which he liked to use for various different talks, lectures, and so forth. So I went there. The interesting part were that I was talking at this particularly workshop in which I did about the old-fashioned mediumship, the old-fashioned way of doing hauntings for the old days. So I started to talk about copper and iron and the horseshoe. And when I was finished with my lecture, I walked out of the door, and Oyvind came running over to me. He must be in his sort of 70s. And he said to me, Marion, may I talk to you? And I said, yes, of course you can talk to me. What is it, Oyvind? And he said, I'm ever so sorry, he said, but I was listening through the door to your lecture, and I found it absolutely interesting. And I said, why? He said, because when we bought the manor house, that's 250 years old, we came there and we could see the front door, and it had like a huge big stone. You have to go up a couple of steps onto the stone and into the house. And he said, but it had tilted, he said, so it was slighted sideways. So we had to order some people in to come and help us to lift it, so we could put stones underneath it to level it out. But as we looked into it, we actually saw 5 of those horseshoes that you were talking about lying in a circle, and didn't know what it was, didn't know what to do with it. And I looked at Oyvind and I said, I hope you haven't removed it. And he said, no, we didn't. So that was the first time I actually came into view that actually they have used in those times, 250 years ago in Sweden, they have used these horseshoes in a circle underneath the front door as for protection against any evil or spirit to enter that house. And I did say to him, have you actually found any kind of disturbance? And he said, nope, that's absolutely nothing. It's peaceful here. So I would just go back in again if I can, just to give you that sharing again, so you can see the front door, and you can see how beautiful it is. I think that was how we did it, and we did it like that. Let me just put it up there. Can you see the door of the Swedish manor? Yeah. And you can see here, that's where the big stones were. Can you all see that, I hope? And then you see that one, you will see that has been placed back in again, but it was underneath that door that he found these 5 horseshoes. So that was an interesting story for me, because it again proves to me that I was on the right track to find out what he used in the old days. Then from there, what happened were, I went up to North Norway, where we have got what is known as Sami people. And the Sami people are obviously people who has always lived by nature in their tents, as known as a lavo. They are extremely people who lives by the land, the reindeers. They have a lot of traditions up there, all about nature, about hauntings, communication, holy places, all sorts of things like that. But when I started to talk to the Nordic, is what you call the top chief, I told them my interest in trying to find out about what people would use, for instance, up in North Norway, Sweden and Finland, for protection against either bad spirit or protection against anything. And he laughed and he said, "Oh, did you know about that?" And I said, "No, that's why I'm asking. I would like to know, what do you do?" And then he turned around and he said, "That's easy. We have something," he said. It is a dress that he used. You will see that in a minute. It's known as a kofta. And in the kofta, we have things in our belt we have sewed in. And it is a metal that runs through it. It's like an old copper. It's like zinc thread. It's like brass that gets woven into our belts and also the buttons. And that gives us the protection for anything that is bad, evil. We keep old spirit out of it when we wear a kofta. And he said that we also, because we weren't Christian at that time when all this started, he said, so we didn't have christenings for our children, so we have to protect our children. And he said, what we did there, we took knives that was literally made out of iron, and they had a reindeer sort of handle on it, and we put it underneath the mattress. And then we would decorate, he said, the crypt, whatever they had, with small nails that was literally made out of, again, iron. And I was totally astounded by that. And I thought, oh my God, here we go again. Here comes the iron back up again. And as time progresses, and he wanted to show me more things, he wanted to show me about lines in the earth, because he believe a lot in, it's not like a ley line, but it's just energy lines he talk about, where they can walk in safety. And he said there are certain places where you don't want anybody to either walk or go on, because you don't understand what the lines is all about. But as we was walking along, I happened to fall over and hurt my leg. And I was limping. I had such a bad, it was like, it's not a wound I had, but my leg really swelled up, or my ankle really swelled up. So this Sami person said to me, don't worry, Marion, we will hop over to another Sami that will cure it for you. And I thought, what do you mean she will cure it for me? So she said, well, come on with us. And he sort of lifted me over to her sort of place where she lived. We got into her kitchen. And she looked at my foot and she says, I have to take your shoe off. And she took my shoe off and she took and lifted my foot onto the table. And then she went over to a drawer. And then she was rattling in this drawer. And I thought, what on earth is she going for? And she came back again. And what she did, she took a huge big knife out. And you could see it was rusting. And then it had like symbols on it. And it also had the horns from the reindeer. And she came over with it and took it over her head, said some words, and then she placed it on top of my foot, that was now lying on top of the table. And she was going up and down, brushing it up and down, like just saying a lot of words. And as I was looking at my foot, you could see the swelling literally just disappearing and become completely normal again. And when she was finished with that, she just took it, threw it over the drawer, kicked the drawer in and says, right, let's carry on with the work you were doing. And that was it. So I realized, again, this is the iron. Not only have you got iron that you're doing for protection, we've also got iron now, you're actually doing it for healing. And the battle I was having constantly, I just couldn't believe it. Until then I had to go down to the mid of Norway, because there was a house down there that was extremely haunted. And he wanted me to go in to find out what it was. And as I arrived there, they gave me a bedroom which was downstairs. And that whole night, I just could not sleep. There's no way I could sleep. I just could not sleep. I had a Nordic, as again, is a shamanic man walking outside my window, tapping constantly on wooden bells, dung, 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 just tapping them. And I just sat and I thought, for God's sake, will you let me sleep? I couldn't sleep. So in the morning, I got upstairs and I sort of said to him, why did you give me that room? What's the point in that one if you knew it was so haunted? And he just looked at me and said, oh my God, have you seen him? And I said, seen him? Yes, I have. And I said, what on earth made you build this house here? And he said, we didn't actually build it because the man who owned the piece of land had this house built, but nobody wanted to live there. And I said, and he sold it to you. I want to go down and speak to him. So I marched down the hill, down to the farm, and in my very strong Norwegian, sort of said to him, you know, how dare you sell them a piece of land, I said, which you're not supposed to build on, which belonged to the Sami people, which was a holy place for them. Why have you suddenly just built something? And he ran off. He didn't even want to speak to me. So the only way I could actually deal with this was trying to understand the iron and the copper. And sort of said, it's got to be the only things that's going to alter the energy within that piece of land. So we went into town and I got copper rods and went back up to the house. I got 8 of them. And I walked around the land and house and felt with my fingers and I kept on banging them into the ground. And as we was finished after about an hour or so, the whole house literally, it just shook and everything was fine. And they had 2 Norwegian woodcats. They had not been into that house for 6 years. They have lived there. They just lived outside. As soon as this was done, they came straight into the house and laid on the kitchen floor. So there was another time, this was now with the copper, in which I realized that also has some kind of power in stopping either a ley line or it encloses things or whatever. So that for me, again, was an interesting story to see that we can use that kind. I'm just going to go out and show you what the shamanic people looks like and the kofta. So, right here. Can you see here? They sit in the level and they have got all the clothing on and belts on and everywhere, and it's completely protected around them. So they keep out literally all of the evil things. Interesting.
Fascinating.
So thereof, I still do my research. It's about a year later, I just had to find out all these things. So my journey then became all the way up to Greenland. And I thought, nice, let's go up and see what we can find in Greenland. I really want to understand the Greenlandic people. I want to understand them because it's a very superstitious country. The history is shared in superstition. It literally is fear. There is so much fear in Greenland. It's almost unbelievable, the fear there is in Greenland. They are frightened of everything because they have spirit walking everywhere. They have got physical phenomena anywhere. In the light, it will happen. In the night, it will happen. It will happen everywhere. So I had to sort of find out what they were doing. So I was invited to go and have dinner with a Greenlandic family. And as I went to their place in Nuuk, it's called, that's the capital of Greenland, I saw a very old lady sitting in the corner just nodding and looking at me. And when we have had our dinner, she wanted to talk to me. So I turned around and I said, are you all right? She said, yeah, but I want to talk to you, Marion, because I know that you will understand now what it is I'm going to tell you. And I sort of said to her, okay. She then told me that when she were a little girl, she said, I want to tell you the story because you have to learn about the superstition we have. You have to learn about the strength of Greenland. You have to learn about the people and what we do as being quite normal every day. And it happens so much. She said that she had a kayak in which her family owned. And it was a kayak that you could sit at about 4 or 5 people in. So that day it was herself, and it was her grandparents, her mom and dad, and then a brother. That was who was in the kayak. And they all went into the fjord of Nuuk. They were going for berries because that once a year there is a place where you could actually go for berries. And you could pick them, come home, and then you could make dinner with the berries for the fish. And she said, as we took the kayak and we pulled it up after about an hour rowing, you see, he said, we all went up to what we call the hill and we started picking the berries. And then suddenly we all went back into the boat again and we all started to row back out again to where all the iceberg are. And then suddenly the grandpa said, hang on, we have one missing here. And yes, it's true, there was one missing. And it was the smallest of the girls. So they all thought, oh my God, we better go back and get her. So they could see her standing on the top. And then he was starting to sort of doing finger language to her and said, we'll come in and get you, just a minute. But she ran down with her bucket and she suddenly ran all the way underwater, straight out to the kayak. She put her bag, her little thing down on the ground, jumped into the kayak, and then she took the basket and put it back in again. And everybody just sat completely still because there was no ice on the water at all. And mother just took her feet up to the air. She wanted to see her feet. And she saw 2 stripes underneath her magazine that was wet and the rest wasn't. And he got back in again. So she told me this happens all the time. This is why people are very superstitious. That's why people are very afraid. And then she said, the funny part about it is, she said, this is not the only story, she said, but one more story I would like to tell you, she said, that is that when I was young, this is now this old lady who was a little girl in a kayak who told me this. She said, we had confirmation as the Christian community came in. So within the Christianity, they have, when they're about 14, they have what we call a confirmation. And all the girls was lying in one room. And this particular girl was given literally a bear skin with a bear head and a bear skin, and was really happy she has got it because it was something she has wanted for many years. And she said, but suddenly in the middle of the night, she said, it became so frightening because suddenly the bear skin raised itself up and stood in the middle of the room and started to walk around. And all the children just screamed and started running. And when they all got back with the father, back in again to the room where they were sleeping, they couldn't find the bearskin. That has totally vanished. When this girl, or this elderly woman, became, young, she was about maybe in her 40s and 50s, she got a job in the local library in Nuuk, down in a department with all the children where she could sit and she could tell stories. And suddenly this box appeared. And when she opened the box up, she found that bearskin in which she has lost when she was 14, that has come alight again. So again, she tried to point to me what this is all about. And again, this superstition in which they have and the fear and fright. So I asked her, but what do you do when you have this? How do you protect yourself? And she turned around and she said that do you have something called a tapanuk? It is, or a tapalake, they are called. It's a sort of a figure in which has been caved out. And their sort of elder will do this for protection. They will put it all over in the home. And they have also got something called a drummer mayor, which means it is a man who will start using his drum, and he will say words and dance around to disperse literally anything that is evil or anything that is bad. And this is what he did in Greenland. And he will also have used at that time iron. They told me they just had iron just laid in the windows. But these were the things in which they used. I would just like to just share one more screen with you again, and I will show you what it looks like. There. Can you see it? This funny figure here, there. This is a one that is called the Tabalulak. And that is a figure that is carved out either from a walrus, or it is done from, in the old days, from bones of a dead child. But that will protect anybody or anything. And you can see we have got, there is the Greenlandic Onemere, as he called him, and he will go around and he will dance and he will go around singing and he will go around dispersing all the energies. So that is the Greenland. But because I do my journey up to Greenland quite a lot because I'm working there, I also meet a lot of both the governmental people and from other places up there. And it does seem to be that Greenland has a problem with the hauntings because of the superstition. So I always goes up there and either work for big companies that's up there, try to find out why it is. I'm now teaching them how to put copper and iron down in the ground. So again, we go back with incredible stories from that time. Now, another thing that is very interesting, and that is that, again, traveling around into Iceland. And Iceland, I don't know how many people here who will know a little bit about Iceland. But Iceland has actually had spiritualism like Denmark for many, many years. It had some of the most finest mediums in the world, physical medium in specific. It is a very old country. It's also a country of nature. It is a country that live for the geysers, is what we call it, the water spout and things like that, very healthy people. But when you come into to Iceland itself, and you come into their capital in Iceland, Reykjavik it's called, you actually get a map, and that will tell you where all the hauntings are, because there's small ghosts everywhere, but you can find them. It's the first ever country I have seen you got a map for hauntings and ghosts. But what is interesting about this country, again, it has such an old tradition. It is quite fascinating, Iceland. So when I was there, I was starting to do both radio and television and everything else. And I was actually saying, despite that we have a lot of very good mediums in Iceland, specifically going back in time, I said there's also a lot of negative aspects here. And as I was talking about the negative aspect, actually the priest from Reykjavik came up and said that Marion is completely right in that there's a lot of negative energy here too. So again, I thought, no, I will have to go and find out what this is all about and what did he use in those days? What was Ireland? You know, what is that good for? I don't know how many people who understands when I start talking about fairies, elves. They have various different kind of trolls, everything that lives in the underworld. I don't know if you know that that is what Iceland is really known for, the small people, they call them. And you can never, for instance, build a house if the small people says that you can't build it, you have to move it. Then you have to move it a couple of meters further down, then you can build it. You have to have the permission to do so. People have tried in Iceland to ignore it, but each time that they ignore it, there's a disaster happening. So it is interesting that he had full communication with what is called the underworld of all sort of creatures. A man came to me and he said to me, I would like to show you something, Marion, of interest. He was a healer. He's now passed over. He was an elderly gentleman. And he said, you have heard about our stones in Iceland, haven't you? And I said, oh yeah, you mean the one where the motorway has to go around it because you couldn't move it? She said, yes, that kind of stone, he said. And he said, the thing is, Marion, that is, you have to have the permission to do most things in Iceland. You can't just do it. You have to ask. So when I moved in, he said, to my house, I saw this stone, and I realized that the stone in my garden was what he called the underworld stone. And yes, I had to move my house a couple of meters further down to build it. And when I built it, it was accepted. And the stone itself was also a healing stone. It was a mender. He called it, it mended things. And I thought, I wonder what he thought of, or what she meant by mending things. So we got into his house, and he said, I think that I will let my wife tell you, and then you can go out and you can feel the stone yourself, because I will give you the permission to do so. So his wife came and smiled and said, let me tell you my stories, he said. About 5 months ago, he said, I was going out of the house and going up to catch the bus into Reykjavik. I was going there to do a big shopping, and I was getting eggs and I was getting various different things. As I came back home again, he said, she slid and she fell, and all her things that she has bought just fell onto the ground. And she said, what was very interesting, she said, was that all my eggs broke. Every one of my eggs broke. And I just went, oh no, I'm not going back to get more eggs. So she went indoors, and she went there to get something to take it all away so nobody else would fall. So when she got into the kitchen again, she thought, what on earth is that? And on her kitchen table, there was 2 of the eggs was whole and laid back again in its box. 2 eggs was on the stove actually being cooked. And one of the eggs have gone in through a milk bottle and was just lying down the bottom. And another egg was just on the pan frying. I put my hands up. It's just incredible. And I sat, and you looked at this lady, and you know, she was an elderly lady. You could see her face just sitting, oh yes, that's our stone. And I thought, oh my God. And she said, would you like to try? I said, try what? I went, said, go and stand in the stone. Don't go and put your hands on it or do anything. So I went out. It was, by this time, it was -20. Rather cold. I just had a little jacket on me, went out there, leaned against the stone like that, shut my eyes, and then I got pushed forward again. And he looked at me and he said, you all right, Marion? I said, yeah, I was fine. Did you see anything? No, I just heard the stone say, I was here before man, and here I stand. And that was it. And he said, you're not cold? And I said, no, why should I be cold? Well, you stood out here for half an hour with hardly any clothes on, and it's -20. I had no idea of that time, had vanished. I thought it was a split of a second. So he said, well, stories like that is full in Iceland. And he said, we always look after each other. And there are people who protect their homes so much that you don't even need to have burglar alarms, you don't need to have anything. You just have these people who knows what to do within protection. And so then he said, let me tell you another story. And I thought, oh, here we go. And he said, there was an old lady who lived further up the hill, Marion. And we all knew her. She was a very old lady, a Hildardo, her name was. And Hildardo was one of those who gathering all herbs in the summertime and all sort of things like that. And we know she was a bit of a witch, she said, and could talk to all the small people. And she said, but it came a time where we couldn't understand where she were, and we couldn't see her chimney smoking because, again, it was partly winter time, and we know people are alive if the chimney is smoking. So they phoned up the local police and asked them to go up to find out where she were. So the police sort of said, okay, we will send 2 fresh people up there in the car to find out what is this all about. As he came up there, they knocked on the door, there was no reply. They walked around and they looked through the windows, couldn't see anything. And he thought, well, what do we do here then? So they thought, well, the only things that we can do is break in, and that's to smash the window and then see if we can get in. So one of the police officers got his truncheon out, smashed in the window, and as he did that, there was such a blast of air coming from all directions. All the window literally blew open. All the 2 doors blew wide open. And he really actually was smashed himself against the ground. And he stood up there, dusted himself, and went in and found her dead. So that's again a very strange form of protection that she has put around the home, that nobody could enter the home, dead or alive. In that sense of it, she were dead, but that was still the reason of how she herself has literally protected this house. And I just found these stories was again extremely interesting, because that they have the small people, the elf and the nymph or whatever they have there, and would never do anything without them. Fascinating story. Then my last little story, in which I will tell you, I will show you the stone in a minute. The last story were that I went into Denmark. And when I was in Denmark, again, I did my research to find out, well, what on earth did we then do in Denmark? I mean, we must have had something before every haunting was in Denmark, before my TV programs and things like that. So I did a workshop, and suddenly a woman came in called Gudrun. And I was having a conversation with Gudrun, and she said that she were what we knowing as a Viking. Vikings in Denmark is a legal religion now. They live as Vikings, they work as Vikings, they eat as Vikings, they do everything as Vikings. And she came in and wanted to see me and see how I worked. And I said to Gudrun, so what do you do, Gudrun? Do you have mediums in the Viking era? She said, of course. And I said, really? She said, yeah, we have mediums, but we call them vulvings. And I said, really? What does vulvings do? She said, well, I will come tomorrow and I will show you. So she came the next day, and she had her dress on. She did her face in, and she had a long robe on, and she sat on her skin that she brought with her. And then she got us to go around a circle where she was sitting and doing a very funny dance and a funny movement, some rhythm she told us we had to do. And then she took the whole hood and stuck it over her face, and she bent herself down like this, and then she sat there. And within sort of 10 minutes or so, she was in a trance, and you could hear her speaking, and people could ask her questions. And then I knew that I had to somehow get her back out of it again, because she gave me some charms I had to ring to get her back out again. So I did that, and she came back again. And I just found that again was extraordinarily interesting to know that in the Viking era, 1,000 years ago, they actually had mediums. And of course, for those of you who is in here who understand physical mediumship, knows that our physical medium sits in a cabinet. And what she actually did with her robe was she put it over her head, and that became her cabinet for all the activities. I'm just going to do a screen share now. I learned how to do it. So just a minute. There. And I will show you. Are you ready, everybody? If I take you there, right. We did a demonstration. I wanted to put two things together in Denmark. I wanted to show people how two mediums from two different eras could work together. So we did a demonstration, and we had 750 people coming in from all over Denmark to have and see the demonstration, how two mediums could work. So here you can see me sitting, and then you can see Vulving. You can see her painted face, that is to frighten spirit. You can see her staff in which she sits with, and you can see her bell lies there, you can ring with. And then of course the horn there she had. So that was an extraordinary, interesting demonstration. And I also has an incredible respect of the Viking. Can you see the stone there from Iceland? That is the stone in which you lean up against, which holds an awful lot of magic, where the small people lives and where they can live in peace as long as the house got moved a little bit further back. So again, I found that extraordinary interesting to look at. Back again here. So I have now been around and sort of talked about the magic, the instrument we used in the Nordic countries. But when we have or we was renovated. We have a farm in France, and it's up in something called Northern Brittany. We had it for about 35 years now. And that's from the 17th centuries and 18th centuries. That's how old it is. But as we was doing the renovation to our farm, you never guess what we found buried in our walls. Horseshoes. We found 4 horseshoes in our wall. And I realized, well, in France, you also understand the purpose of horseshoes and the protection. And believe me, we have never had any problems in our farm in France neither. So we had left those horseshoes where it should be for protection within our French farm. I hope you have enjoyed just a little bit about the Nordic countries, Scandinavia. In what I have seen and heard, I have been totally gobsmacked, that's what we call it in England, been healed, by iron, has been protected by iron, copper, you can put the rods down, herbs you can use. Friends in Scotland have helped me. She was a young girl called Ryan. She was, I think, the 4th or the 5th generation of witches and also of gypsies. And she knew exactly what to use and what herbs to use, not just to cure people, but also to destroy evil and people and all sort of things like that. I learned an awful lot by her. And she also used iron nails. And that was very interesting to hear that she has that in common with everybody else from Scotland. There you go.
Marion, that was absolutely fascinating. Let me just, before we go into questions, let me just raise a couple of issues. Today, many people in the West, don't believe in negative spirits. They don't think there is such a thing as evil. They ignore it. And they certainly don't believe in the little people or the small people, nature spirits. All of the indigenous cultures do. The Australian Aborigines, for example, have a huge respect and always request permission of the ancestors and the spirits before they go into a place. Now, I'm just wondering how this knowledge can help mediums today. What can the average medium in America do to use this kind of knowledge of negative spirits and nature spirits as part of their work? Do you use it in England? Do you use any of this awareness?
Yes, I use it, and I also talk and I give lectures upon it, because I just think that we have gone so modern today. Everything is so complicated today that my whole point was of trying to give people something that wasn't complicated, that was so simple, but it worked. That was my whole sort of talk about having these metals he were using, things that he was using, rather than today. And I just think that mediums, I'm afraid to say, we have got so far forward, and the amount of money that's paid for it was something that you can really do yourself, and you can understand and learn it. And of course there is negative aspect around, there has always been, but you don't have to call a medium in to try to destroy it or get rid of it. You can really do it yourself. You can learn about it. It had taken me, from the year 2000 and up until now to really understand what they were using all the time. It has been a fascinating journey, and also have been allowed to be with these people like the Sami people, the Greenlandic people, the Icelandic people, and actually see them work it, and actually see what they can do and see the power it has gone. I mean, what would you say to people if I turn around and say to you, there's people in North Norway known as the Sami people who can and are used in hospitals, for instance. If they have an operation and the doctors can't stop the blood, they have internal bleedings, they call in Sami people, they're known as blood stoppers, that comes in, say a couple of words and the blood stop, and they can do the operation and the people live. Now, what I'm trying to say is we have a lot to learn by the nature people. We have a lot to learn by stories that you hear. try to understand them and then take it into your work. If you go out and do any kind of exorcism or house cleaning, try to understand, is it a spirit, is it a ghost, is it native? You have to go back and try to learn.
I actually have two questions. The first one is, how did they place the horseshoes? Because I've heard like one way or the other is good luck. And then the other question is, can you take pictures of the earth spirits?
Yeah. Forget about good luck or bad luck, please. That is nothing to do with the horseshoe at all. The whole thing is that a horseshoe in which you have to get has to be of iron. It is a substitute iron. It is iron. You can't get iron today. You don't get it very often because I think people today use stainless steel, not iron. Do you see what I mean? So it doesn't matter how you put these horseshoe. I know that the horseshoe was inwardly like this, that, you know, so that he was sitting like inwardly. The horseshoes I found in my walls in France were just put in, and then all massive big bricks around it. So it is the iron, not actually how you put them or which way you put them, has nothing to do with that. I think it is something that we are now saying today for good or bad luck, and that's how we're using it. But that was not the point with that.
Okay, I understand. Sure.
Did you say, can we take pictures of it? Is that what you said?
Of the earth spirits, like the fairies and the gnomes and things?
I have never myself taken any photograph, and I have never myself spoken to them. But I have to have extraordinary respect for those who said they do speak to them, they do come to them. I saw the respect I had to have with the stone in Iceland. I have seen what it has done in Iceland and how many people in Iceland that believe in it. There's a motorway that doesn't go straight, it goes around a huge big stone because that you couldn't move the stone. Everybody died who tried to move it. So there must be something in it. This is what I'm saying. Open our eyes and look, you know, with our ancestors. And I think that Wendy also said something about the Aboriginals and things like this. There is something, you know, that we just don't understand today. But I think that we have to just try to learn a little bit of it.
Thank you. That was a wonderful talk. What country did you say the blood stoppers were active in?
The ones in which I have seen is in North Norway, done by the Sami people, which are the nature people. It's they are very much correlated to the American Indian.
Can you spell that sound?
Is Sami, S-A-M-I.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sami, yeah. They are reluctant to talk a lot about it because of the superstitions around people and things like that, but they exist today. They have got three forms of Sami people. They have got what's called the water Sami people, the land Sami people, and the mountain Sami people. And they have a completely different language to the Norwegian language spoken. But they have got the power of healing and stopping the blood. They call them blood stoppers. But you can also find them in other countries, not only in Norway. You can find them all over the place. It is something that I think that I heard about in Cornwall in England. I heard about one gentleman in Cornwall in England who did it, and I think in other countries it is also known as the blood stoppers. They are healers, literally healers, but they stop the blood. And you see, if you really think about it, Carol, if you are out, let us see, on the sea, and you manage to cut yourself. In those days, you didn't have helicopters to come and rescue you. So you would be bleeding to death. So if you didn't have somebody who could stop the blood, then you wouldn't have lived. Do you understand that?
Yes.
I'm just happy to know that in Norway, in one of the biggest hospitals, they are using Sami people to stop the blood in internal organs if they have an operation.
Thank you. Marion, my question is, have any of the people mentioned putting any of these iron or copper to actually protect themselves from perhaps the little fairies or the mischievous wee people? Have they ever mentioned that? Because there could be mischievous and enlightened ones as well. So can you please expand on that?
I know that in Iceland, I haven't heard they're actually using completely iron or copper in the ground. I know that they can talk to the smaller people and they can chase other small people away, or they can be left in peace. But I know that there's people, as I said about the woman who protected her inner house. And when she passed over, when they tried to get in, this wind blew everything open and closed the police officers got shot backwards. So there is another power there, in which I again know that you don't speak very much of in Iceland. It's a very powerful place, Iceland, in specific with the geysers and their small people and things like that, also in animals and all. But the only place that I know that they have used the iron is outside the cathedral in Reykjavik. When it was excavated, they moved away the front step, and there they found horseshoes again lying in a circle. But there was also an animal of a horse. There was a horse head and a horse's tail there too. So they would have used that for the church, but not for the small people.
I'm really perplexed by that iron thing. That's really interesting. I'm wondering, first of all, I wonder what you think might be behind that, or are you just not questioning it? You know, just if it works, you know, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there's, I mean, I'm speculating if iron has something to do with grounding oneself. Does it have an energy that encourages grounding, which is in so many different courses I've gone to, doing grounding seems to be protective.
Do you know, I can't answer you that one, because what I have done is my research is what they are using. But it seems to be, it can't be stainless steel. It can only be iron. It has to be in the old iron, like in horseshoes or in nails they were put into walls or whatever. But I believe there has to be some kind of power within the iron itself. It's like there is in any kind of metal, really. It holds power, it has energy. Like the copper, there's lots of churches that use copper roofs or use it, you know, on the churches and things like that, because it has a conduct to it, all sort of things like that. I just know the metal has been very important, but the only things I've come across, as I said, is the iron, it is the copper, and also, of course, the brass and the zinc and things like that, in which was woven into clothing in Norway.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Marion. You mentioned the energy lines and that they are not ley lines.
Yeah.
So what are these energy lines? What do you know about them?
All I know is, because I was out again with the Sami people, it's not a ley line as a ley line. They call them something else. They call them water lines. It is something to do with the water are flowing within the Norwegian mountains and streams or whatever. They use the word literally as water line. And one day when I was out walking with the Sami people, they told me about this line. And then this Nordic turned around and said to me, "Do me a favor, Marion. Go down there and lay down. Just lay down. Be quiet and just lay down." And I didn't know what he was talking about and why I had to lay down. So I walked down on this path. I laid in the path and I sat up and I laid sideways and I sat up and I laid the other way and I sat this way. I thought, what's he talking about, this guy? I can't lie here. So I stood up again and I said, what was the purpose in that? My purpose is to prove to you that nothing should ever be built there, lay there, put a tent up there, and nothing else like that. It is our piece of land.
Fascinating.
But they call it water lines. They didn't call them
Water lines, yeah.
Water lines.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if it's and the energy is associated with dowsing.
Could very well be.
Mm-hmm.
I have never seen them ever using a dowser. I just know that they have these paths where they are walking. The same as they have got, like in Iceland, they have got rocks called them holy places where they are gathering. They have something like they have in America, the TV, you know, the tent they have in America. They call them lavo. They have the same there. So they also have places where they all can be and gathering and do the drumming and everything else like that.
Wonderful. So did they use the iron in mediumship, in physical mediumship? I mean, rather like a crystal or that some people use.
Well, I know certain people will use that kind of thing. I have never had anything iron within my circles that I have got. I never sat for iron at all.
Mhm.
But I do know they uses a lot of things. That's actually something I should try. I think try to bring something in and see what happens.
See what
You know,
happens. Yeah,
and
let
just
me
see
know.
what happens. Anybody
Let us
who has
know.
a physical circle,
Right.
please do me a favor, either put copper or iron in.
Yeah,
That would be quite fascinating.
yeah, it would be.
Mm.
We'll ask him. We'll ask him
Yeah.
tonight.
But
We'll
I
ask
do
our
know.
team tonight.
But I do know on one stage we had a circle in London. Oh, I'll go back again many, many years. It was a physical circle. And we had a new chair put in the cabinet because the old chair was very rocky and things like that. So my circle leader took it and put it outside for the dustman to pick up the next day or the next day again. And I was given a new chair for the sitting in the cabinet. And that evening we found 7 nails lying in the circle, and we thought, well, where those nails come from? But when we all went home, we stood and looked. The chair itself has been unscrewed, and all the nails and screws was lying in our circle.
I'd like to know if the cloak that was used by the medium as the channeler, the cloak, if that was made out of any special material or color, and how loose it was, and also, and then I had another question too.
Yeah, the Viking had a green robe on, and that was made of, I think, the animals like sheep or whatever they had. She did it herself. She slaughtered, I have to say, 8 animals to be able to weave that cloak she had, and she's had it for many years. And it was quite a big wooded one, and it was very long, right down to the ground. And what she was sitting on was another animal's skin. She was sitting on, it was almost like a box. She's made herself taller and higher. So she was sitting up with her staff, holding her staff in her hand like this. Then she just took the cloak and slung it over herself like this. And the one arm came out where her staff was. And she just banged the staff a couple of times like this into the ground. Vroom, vroom, vroom. And then we were all dancing around. And within sort of, I don't know, a little while, she suddenly went into a trance and you could speak to her.
Wow. Marion, just in listening to you, I was wondering, and I think I pretty much know the answer to the question, but I was wondering if there's been any studies done or any of this committed in books, or is it just like our Indigenous people, that's all oral communication of.
I think there's a lot of oral communication in this one here, because it's like the Sami people today has become New Sami, which has got a Christian background behind them, where the old Sami people didn't have the Christian behind it. So they were much more real and into the old, I would say, understanding. So there's a big of a fraction amongst the Sami people at the moment, very sadly. But all the stories in which I'm telling you has been handled down by words and words and stories. The same as in Iceland, though there is books written in Iceland about the small people, but I think they're all in Icelandic. I'm not quite sure, but it might be in Icelandic. I do know in North Norway, you asked me if they have done research into this one. Yes, they have, because of the ones I got the story from. She was a scientist. She was a scientist within as a doctor, and she was the one who told me the story about this specific hospital, about the stopping blood.
Look,
Sorry.
yeah, there's been several people have had to leave early, and all of them have said that it was a great presentation and they thank you very much. And I also echo that myself. I always like to hear stories of how people practice in individual countries, and I think that you've been a very eloquent speaker on behalf of all these different ways of being in touch with spirit, I guess, or not in touch.
Thank you.